So there's 3 synonyms, and a synonym is a word that has the same meaning for solution. The first one is an x-intercept. The second one is a root. The third one is a zero. They all mean the same thing. So when you're looking at a graph, if I ask you for the x-intercepts or the solution, I want you to tell me the x-intercepts. So for question number 1, that would be these 2 places. Tell me the 2 places where I put those red dots. So Kevin, what are my 2 solutions? Positive 2. And where's the other one at? Negative 4. It is that simple. That is all you have to do. Go ahead and do number 2. Look at number 2. I'll call on somebody else to give me the solution for question number 2. Clinton, what are your solutions for question 2? Who had x equals -1 and x equals +4? All right. Number 3, go ahead and look at question 3. Kelly, what would you say your solutions are for number 3? X equals 0, x equals -3. Who had that?
I switched them up.
That's okay. So you put the -3 first and then a 0. The order doesn't matter. The order that you write the answers, that don't matter. I probably should have put it. I mean, it doesn't matter. As long as you have the right 2 numbers. All right, and the last one, number 4. Anybody want to volunteer for number 4? Jeremiah. X equals -1 and x equals +1. Any questions about that? All right, so let's do our first lesson. Our first lesson is going to go into homework 16, which is how to graph in standard form. So go ahead and go to page 153. And then off to the side, if you have space or on the separate sheet of paper, let's talk about the steps to graph in standard form. Okay, so here are the steps, because if you don't do your own homework in this chapter, you will probably not be happy with your score on the next test, because the questions from the homework are the questions on the test. So you want to do it from your own ability. So here's your first step. The step number 1 would be to set it equal to 0. Equal to 0. So you want to start by setting it equal to 0. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is to find axis of symmetry, which is opposite of b over 2a. And then step number 3 is going to be to make a table. Yesterday we graphed in vertex form, and today we're graphing in standard form, so it's different, completely different. So when you create your table, whatever you get for step 2, this is going to go in the middle of your table. So this middle value is going, whatever you get for opposite of b over 2a, that's going to go in the middle. Then you're going to count backwards and forwards. All right, so I'll explain what I mean, because it's kind of hard to look at it from this form. It might be confusing. So what I'm saying is, if for step 2, let's say for step 2 you got x equals 0, then you would count backwards and put -1, -2, -3, and then count forwards and put 1, 2, and 3. Or let's say for the axis of symmetry you got 5. So you would count backwards 4, 3, 2, then you would count forward 6, 7, 8. So this number is kind of like the anchor. It's going to tell you the center value because it's your vertex. So let's go ahead and do it together, and then we'll start our homework. So let's look at example 1. Now, unfortunately, they did it for us, but we're still going to try to do it off to the side so you can see. The first thing they did was they set this equal to 0. And the way they did that was they subtracted 10. So first you would subtract the 10 from 14, which would give you -x squared equals 4x plus 4. And then they added the x squared over, and that's how they got 0 equals x squared plus 4x plus 4. This is the format. It has to equal 0. So your equation becomes 0 equals x squared plus 4x plus 4. Okay, step number 2, going back to our list, what did I say? After you set it equal to 0, we're going to find the axis of symmetry. So that's what they did next, was they found the axis of symmetry. X equals opposite of b over 2a. So x equals 4 divided by, equals -4 divided by 2, or -2. Okay, so now let's work as a team and find our y values. So this is what I was saying. Notice how that -2 is in the middle. And they counted backwards 2 and they counted forwards 2. So now we're going to take these 5 numbers and substitute it into this equation. When you substitute it in your calculator, now this is really important. You have x squared plus 4 times x plus 4. So the first number we're going to substitute in is -4. And I want you to notice how I wrote this. If you type this in your calculator like this, that is wrong. If you type it in your calculator like this, that is also wrong. When you type a negative in your calculator and you're trying to square it, you have to put that exponent on the outside. So let's tag team this. I need 5 volunteers. Who's going to substitute in -4? Brooklyn. Who's going to substitute in -3? De'Eric. Who's going to substitute in -2? Jeremiah. -1. Kevin. And 0. Brooklyn. The other Brooklyn. You're going to do 0. Let's go, y'all. Type it in. Okay, hold on to your numbers, and then I'm going to... Wait, which number did you have again, Brooklyn? You had -4. What'd you get? You got 4. And then Jeremiah, what number did you have? What did you get for -2? Okay. Anybody else have their number? What x value did you have? 1. You had -1? What'd you get? 1? Okay. Sorry, I'm kind of old. Can't hear. You got 0 for -2? De'Eric, which number did you have? Okay. And Brooklyn, what did you get for 0? All right. Notice how it's symmetrical. Does everyone see that? See how we have the 4, then we have 1, and we have 0. That's the thing about a parabola. You're going to have repeats in your y value. So the 0 is where this graph crosses the x-axis. Remember, we talked about at the beginning, the synonym for solution, another word for solution is 0. 0 is the same thing as x-intercept. They have the same meaning. So the 0 of this solution is right here. So that would be -2. Therefore, the solution is -2. Okay, so now we're going to start. Now we're not finished because we're actually going to start a second lesson. But before we do that, take out a sheet of paper and let's start our homework. Homework 16. Couple of things I need to make clear about this homework. You have to show work. And you also need to use graph paper to get full credit. Now, no, we're going to go back to it, so maybe just like put it off to the side. Now go ahead and copy down these numbers for homework 16. We're going to do 1 through 4 together. And then we're going to start our second lesson. So looking at page 157, where does that graph for question number 1, where does it touch the x-axis? Does it touch the x-axis? No. So the answer to number 1 is no solution. Number 1 has no solution, no real solution. Okay, it's imaginary. We're going to talk about that a little later. So when you're looking at a graph on the test, if I show you a graph and I ask you for the solution, I want you to tell me where it crosses the x-axis. If it doesn't touch the x-axis, then it has no real solution. What about number 2? What's the solution for number 2? X equals -2 and x equals 5. That's the answer to number 2. What about number 3? Number 3 only has one solution. X equals -4. All right, so now let's look at number 4. And we're going to graph it out, and we're going to follow the steps that I had you write down. These are the steps we're going to graph for standard form. So let's go ahead and do that. So for question number 4, the first thing we're going to do is it set equal to 0? So for number 4, is it already set equal to 0? All right, what's our second step to graph in standard form? Find look at your notes. Yep, find axis of symmetry. So go ahead and do that. Because that's going to be the center of our table. So in this quadratic, A is 1, B is -10, C is 21. So X equals the opposite of B. So if B is -10, then I'm going to use a +10. Divide that by 2 times 1. So what's 10 divided by 2? 5. Who got X equals 5? All right, so now we're going to build a table. And when we build our table, we're going to work as a team for this one. 5 is going to go in the middle. And we're going to count backwards. So if I count backwards from 5, what will be the next 3 numbers? 4, 3, 2. Now let's count forward from 5. 3 numbers. What would be the 6, 7, 8. So we have 7 numbers that we need to substitute in, but we're going to work as a team. So I need a volunteer. Who's going to do 2? Now when you substitute it in, we're substituting it into this equation right here. So you're going to substitute it in. You're going to have x squared minus 10 times x plus 21. So instead of you each doing all of these numbers, let's tag team it. Who's doing number 2? Jeremiah is going to do 2. Who's doing 3? Kevin. Who's doing 4? Kaiwan. Who's doing 5? Marquita, 6. Jonathan, 7. Clinton, 8. Mamadou. All right. And when you have your number, just let me know. Okay, what number did I give you again? I forgot that fast. 3. What'd you get for 3? 0.
I got mine.
All right, what was your number again?
2.
And what'd you get? Okay. Jonathan, what was your number?
6.
Okay, what'd you get? What was your number?
4.
What'd you get?
-3.
Okay, see, we're building our symmetry. Clinton, what number did you have?
7.
What'd you get?
0.
Okay. You could probably fill in, except for 5. Oh, Marquita, what number did you have? What'd you get? -4. Mamadou, did you get 5? Okay. Now, this is why you need graph paper. If you don't have it, use what you got. But you're going to plot these points. Put a point at 2, 5. Put a point at 3, 0. Put a point at 4, -3. Put a point at 5, -4. Plot these points. And that is how it's done. So it's asking you for the solutions. See how for the directions it says solve by graphing? So raise your hand if you can tell me the solutions. The solutions is your x, that's your x-intercepts. How many times does this graph cross through the x-axis? So, Elijah, what are my solutions? X equals 3 and x equals 7. And that is how you do it. So do your own homework, because then you will pass the next test. There's 3 more that you have to do on your own. So let's put that to the side, and now let's go back to reveal, and we're going to start our second lesson, which is imaginary numbers. All right, there's 2 rules that you need to write down for page 161. I just want to summarize what it's saying. And the 2 rules that you need to have written down on this page somewhere. I actually have them right here on the board. But because I'm recording, I'm also going to write it. So the rules are, number 1 is that the square root of -1 is imaginary. So when you see a parabola that doesn't touch the x-axis, that means you don't have real solutions, you have imaginary. And the second rule is that I squared is -1. Those are your two rules to summarize what they have. They have it written up here in this paragraph, but that can be a little confusing the way it's worded. So we're only going to do a couple more examples together. We're going to simplify square roots. So who's heard of perfect squares? Who knows what that is? All right, let's see how high we can go. Fourth period. Let's see. What is 2 times 2 without a calculator? 2 times 2. 3 times 3. 4 times 4. 5 times 5. 6 times 6. 7 times 7. Uh-oh. 49. Okay. 8 times 8. 9 times 9. 10 times 10. 11 times 11. Ooh. 121. 12 times 12. This is usually when we start to get, the choir kind of gets but we were strong up until 100, and that's really all I really care about. These are perfect squares. You need to know these, okay? You don't really need to even go further than 100. So I want to explain to you how they did example 1, because they did it for you, but I need for you to understand how they did it. So I'm going to go through it with you, and I recommend you write down the steps. Okay? So the first step, whenever you see a negative, is to take the -1 out. You always start by take that -1 out. So I'm going to separate this into -1 times positive 294. That's what I'm going to do. If you see a negative underneath the square root, you have to pull it out. You cannot leave it there. All right, now what I want you to do with your calculators is take this 294. You're going to ignore the square root right now. And we need to figure out which one of these magic numbers will go into 294. Now, I don't recommend you start at the top of the list. I recommend you start towards the bottom. So how will you know if that number is a factor? It won't be positive, but it'll be a whole number. So if you take 294 and divide it by 144 in your calculator. So in your calculators, take 294 divided by 144. Did you get a decimal? That means that 144 is not a factor. So now I want you to keep going up the list. Don't say it out loud, but I want you to figure out which one of these numbers will go into 294. And when you know it, just hold on to it. You found it already? Okay, hold on to it. One of these numbers will go into 294, and you need to figure out which one it is. Who found the number? All right, what's the number? 49. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this down again. 49 times what is 294? 6. So let me pause. Does everyone see what I did here? I took this number and I broke it down to 3 pieces. Now, the product of these 3 numbers is the same as -294. So now we're ready to simplify each one of these. What is the square root of -1? What did I say in the first rule? The square root of -1 is what? I. So I'm going to put an I for this one. What about the square root of 49? 7. And the 6 has to stay. Your last step is to switch these two. Now, because when you're talking in math, we always put the number first. So like we don't say x3, we say 3x. So when you switch it, your final answer would be 7I root 6. Jeremiah, did you have a question for me?
I was gonna say -1.
So that is the rule. Okay, so it was a negative. You take if there is a negative, you have to take it out first.
Oh, what if it's one?
I can't hear you.
What if it's one?
Then we don't have to take it out. All right, now you see how they got that answer. So we only got a couple more. I want you to try to do that check under it. Try to see if you can do this check. So if this is a multiple choice question on the test, worth 3 points. See if you can do it. See if you can figure out if the answer is A, B, or C. Now, is there a negative underneath the square root? Let me ask you that.
Yes.
Do you see a negative?
Yes.
So what do you have to do with that negative?
Negative.
You have to start by taking it out. Your first step is to take out the -1. We're going to separate the -1 from the 75. Then you're going to look at 75. You see these numbers on the board that I put the box around? Figure out which one of these numbers in this box. These are your perfect squares. Which one of those will go into 75? Don't say it out loud. I recommend you start towards the bottom. But one of these numbers is a factor of 75. That's your second step. Yes. What is the factor? Which one of those numbers in that box can I take out of 75? 25 times what? So I'm going to break that apart to a 25 times a 3 and then this I. So would you agree that -1 times 25 times 3 is the same as -75? So you can break it apart. That's okay. But you only break it apart, this number here. If this was, say, for example, if this was a 10, then I would leave it alone. Because if you can't take out a perfect square, we leave it alone. We always take a negative out, then we look at the number to see if we can break it down further. So the square root of -1 is I. What's the square root of 25? So what answer would you choose, A, B, C, or D? C. If you chose C on the test, if this was an actual test question, you would get that right. All right, last example is example 2. And we'll be done. Then you can go back to finishing the homework that we started. All right, first step. Now we're going to multiply. But notice how these both have negatives. So again, I'm going to work it out off to the side. I recommend you do it the same so that you can actually understand how they got their answer. So step number 1 is to take out that I'm going to break this down to -1 times 10. And then I'm going to break this down to -1 times 15. What's the square root of -1 again? I. And this is, again, I. Okay, so now we're ready to multiply. We're going to take I times I. And what is I times I? Squared. Good job. And now you're going to take and multiply the 10 times 15. What's 10 times 15? 150. So we're almost finished. I squared, look at the rule. What's the second rule? What does I squared equal? -1. Now, don't say it out loud, but I want you to figure out what number in that box can go into 150. Which perfect square we'll divide into 150. Don't say it out loud. If you know it, just hold on to it. Okay, what's that number that goes into 150? 25 times what? So I'm going to break this down to 25 times 6. So the square root of 25 is 5. The 6 has to stay. Now you can multiply these together though, because these are two numbers. You can't do anything with that because that's under a square root. But you can multiply these. You could take -1 times 5. And what is -1 times 5? So your final answer would be -5 root 6. Okay, take back out that homework that we started. We got 10 minutes. Open up the reveal book. And we're going to go right on back to our homework 16. We already got the first 4 done. You only have 4 more to do. So let's do 6, 7, and 9. See if you can get 6 done. Go ahead and find 6. So I need somebody to find the axis of symmetry for question number 6. And we're going to build our graph out. Now you are going to get a decimal. I don't want you to think it's wrong. That's why I want us to start it together. So number 6 is already set equal to 0. So now you're going to find the axis of symmetry. So that would be x equals opposite of b. So what is b for number 6? 1. And what's the opposite of 1? -1 divided by 2 times a. And what's a? 1. So your axis of symmetry is at -0.5. I'm going to write it as a decimal because we like decimals more than we like fractions. Between what two numbers is -0.5? 0 and 1. Nope, not 0 and 1. Between what two numbers is -0.5? 0 and -1. So now you're going to count up, and then you're going to count back and take it from there.